Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the annual Davidson Dunton Research Lecture. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kim Matheson, and I'm the Vice President of Research and International at Carleton University. So this lecture was established in 1983 in memory of one of Carleton's longest-serving presidents, Davidson Dunton. And the lecture provides us with an opportunity to invite one of our distinguished professors to come and share with you, the community, with the Carleton community, with our neighbors, their research findings with regard to the research that they're most recently involved in. This year's Davidson Dunton lecturer is Dr. Marie-Odile Junker. She's a professor in the School of Linguistics and Language Studies and is cross-appointed to the Institute of Cognitive Science and to the Department of French. Clearly multidisciplinary. She's an internationally recognized scholar and is currently holding the very prestigious Killam Research Fellowship from the Canada Council for the Arts. Professor Junker's research concerns the documentation of Aboriginal language and the relation between language preservation and information technologies. She's been working closely with the Cree community in her efforts to ensure that there's a clear relevance and benefits to her work. For example, she created a website in partnership with the Cree school board in Quebec, which involves or hosts about a whole database of oral histories, dictionaries, online language lessons and games, and an interactive grammar of East Cree. She has several other online projects and has recently directed the publication of 8 volumes of the East Cree dictionaries. Dr. Junker's lecture today is entitled Giving Voice to Aboriginal Languages, Putting Information Technologies to Work for People.
It's an honor to be invited to present the Davidson Dunton Research Lecture this year. I would like to thank the Vice President Research, Dr. Matheson, and the members of the committee for the invitation to do so. I also would like to thank Sandy Taylor for organizing everything, and I want to acknowledge the wonderful research environment that I live in here at Carleton. I also want to thank my students and members of my research lab, as well as my husband and family for putting up with me in my academic career. Finally, I thank all of you who have taken the time at the end of the semester, at the end of the long day, to come and attend this lecture. So I started my work as a linguist. Anybody here knows what a linguist is? See, linguists, they're a little bit like I could introduce myself and say, Wajia, Marie-Odile ni Otawachnuji, or Hola, me llamo Maria. Vengo de Francia y soy professora à Carleton. Or, je suis Marie-Odile et je viens de France et je suis prof à Carleton. But if this would make me a polyglot, however, that's what lots of people think a linguist is, right? Someone who speaks many languages. Actually, a linguist is not that. A linguist, people who speak many languages are like drivers of many cars, right? But a linguist is the one who lifts the hood of the car and looks at the engine and goes, wow, 8 cylinders and hydrogen cells in here. If I were going to give you a real linguistics talk today, I would tell you, wow, East Cree is a agglutinative polysynthetic language that's head marking. And it has a glottal stop. It's in phonemic inventory that, it's kind of a historical trace for a dubitative morpheme. But be reassured, I will not talk about such things today. Instead, I'm going to talk about how can information technology help sustain linguistic diversity. Because in a way, being a linguist today, it's a bit like being a biologist and not working on the disappearance of species on Earth. So if you're a linguist, you're kind of sad to see that the object of your study is disappearing, right? So Aboriginal language preservation. And the internet was coming on, late 90s, early 2000s, and how could that help was one of my guiding questions. My second question was, how can linguists' interventions have a positive impact on a community. Not go fetch the data, harvest and run, or go and drill your informant to death so that they feel totally brain dead after the session with you, right? So how can I rethink that kind of work? And then the third question I'm going to try to touch on today is how is academic research redefined in such a context? Before I go on, I need to make clear that when I started my career at Carleton in the early 90s, I was fortunate to join the Participatory Action Research discussion group. That was an interdisciplinary group. And although there were no linguists on that group, I was very much inspired by that work that was being done in social sciences and in international development and other areas, and in psychology as well. And one key idea that I've then taken on as guidelines for my research was to put a bit of focus on the research process rather than just on the research results. The second key point of a participatory action research is to look at the success as something that depends on the positive impact it has on the language and the speakers, rather than, say, a beautiful dictionary collecting dust on a library shelf. Finally, the third aspect of PAR was to define goals and methods with my partners, the speakers, the curriculum designers, and the teachers of the language. So I'm going to show you today 5 examples, if you stay with me all this time, of things that I've tried and experimented with over the last 10 years to put those principles into action. So the first project that I started on around 99, 2000 was the idea to create a website for the Cree language. I was working on Cree at the time as a linguist, asking all kinds of interesting theoretical questions, like I mentioned. And I thought, well, the internet is coming on, and there were like those 9 communities you see in black on the map, and they're hundreds of kilometers apart. Some of them, like Wapmagushtu, no road access, and Waskaganish didn't have road access at the time, just a winter road. So how do you make those people work together? Well, they had a school board and a department of Cree programs. And so I thought, well, maybe I can build a website and see if I can put online resources that are going to help the teachers that are in all those different communities share material, develop material, share resource, and so on. So one of the challenges we encountered right away was that Cree has a syllabics writing system. In academic publication, we usually don't bother. We use a Roman orthography or phonetic transcription. That's the norm. But those Cree people, they very much wanted to see the syllabics on the web. And so in 2000, this was a very big question. Can we do that? Can we put syllabics on the web? And this is what the first ISCRE.org website looked like in its first incarnation. And those syllabics characters you see here, for some of you who have ever seen an HTML code, each syllabic character was back to Gutenberg typography. I had scanned a letter size image of the syllabic, and I was putting each little GIF picture file in my HTML code, really like an old-fashioned typographer. However, the success was tremendous. It was very symbolic, and people were so thrilled to see syllabics on the web. So for those of you who know a bit about syllabics and Canadian Aboriginal syllabics, there is something that was being done in the 90s. It was a documentation and a creation of Unicode as a standard. But Unicode, you can create a beautiful standards, but the software companies had not made things Unicode compliant and so on. So it took us a number of years until we were able to actually participate and move things towards a generalized use of Unicode. And so we had to create all kinds of tricks to make that happen. One of our earliest little thing was a talking syllabic chart where people could click on this and hear the sound and see. But the reason I'm showing it to you is to show you that there is a pretty standard correspondence between a syllabic character and a series of Roman characters. So this was allowing us to have transliteration procedures and create them so that we could run our database in, say, Roman orthography and convert on the fly for the, in browsers and things like that. In general, the issues with syllabic fonts still today can be summarized as follows. The display of the fonts, how do you keyboard them, how do you type them in, conversions like I just talked about, and the distribution. Because, of course, if I get my font from here and you give me an older font over there and you get a font from over there, then we're not compatible. Display issues, they looked like this, they still look like this today. So people who speak a language like French or Spanish, they are familiar with the percentage marks and things. Well, for syllabics, usually we get a square in the worst case scenario, or we get a square somewhere, but not everywhere, or we get a missing character. In Waskaganish, for about 4 or 5 years, all the computers in the school could not print. They had it on the screen, but whenever they printed material for the kids, the ta character was missing. So people were putting the ta by hand in everything they were printed. This is the kind of obstacles that languages like that encounter because, of course, the big corporation developing computers don't really have those people as priority clients. The solution, we built a resource section on the EastCree.org website, and what we discovered was really important was to have real cooperation between the stakeholders and a good dialogue between developers and users. People going there can download the package for PC and Mac, and in collaboration with other linguists, we did develop the packages for syllabics. And our site became the reference site where people would download the latest version, and it really worked. And over the years, of course, there were more fonts available, so once in a while, we test and tell people, oh, don't take this one, but take this one, it works for Cree. Because you can have one for Inuktitut, slightly different, but there might be something missing for Cree, so we recommended fonts, and this has been extremely popular. Another thing we started doing was to just on demand create the problem when you put yourself in that position that you offer resources. Very soon I was getting a lot of phone calls to do tech support on top of my regular job as a professor, right? So over the years we came up with some pretty nice ideas, and one of them was to put online some little videos. So this is in Cree, explanations, and we've put some subtitles for you.
Programs.
And an interesting result of that is what a lot of computer terminology has been created for Cree.
This is Pedagogical. It's a bit nocturnums now that is got it. Can we just start? Microsoft Word to be Debian. Japan. Academic is being Dunton BJ Cree Uni each city the abstain and you stain. Do him shut in and I'm not it. Simpson my Mao each did.
Mao means here it is. There.
I can see spin minute that. Then on Dunton me GGS shouldn't they? I could GGS should they. Grayish nacht. I can BJ Cree Uni East which should I couldn't say beat Debian. To what then of the hay and knock them snatted. Kegje you stein. To Sunham min gum Sunham. Kegje you sted. I got it.
So I mentioned in participatory action research an important step is to define goals and methods with your partners. So that's necessarily going to shape your research a little bit in unexpected ways. These kind of consultations happened in many ways in language documentation workshops. Another aspect linked with the consultation is also the use of workshops to build capacity, right? So for people to take the knowledge and do it themselves when they get home. So here is an example of some workshop work. What we did in the early 2000s, the Canadian government had made it a priority to network the North. So it was fairly easy to get money to do computer training. And because we were able to offer a mix of language-specific computer training, typing in syllabics and things like that, we were able to tap into travel money to run this kind of workshops. At the same time, we were also revising and building the Cree dictionary. So we were killing two birds with one stone. Here is what the work still looks like today. And I want to thank my student Mimi, who is sitting here in the audience, for filming that, and Paula for nicely editing it for me. So what I wanted to show you was this is work I did with Lucy back in 2008, and we put in examples that illustrate how the different conjugations are used. If you look at the equivalent in the Southern dialect, there are no examples. So Southern people, I'd like you to take these pages in the Southern, proofread them, and try to look at what we've done for the Northern and try to think of pieces of text you could use to illustrate how the verbs are used. Alice, do you have the fonts installed on your computer yet?
Yeah. It's always typing in Cree.
Huh.
Yes, it does.
The people who are seeing little boxes for the syllabics, which browser are you using?
Firefox.
Aha.
Dia is Gawamawa. Huh? Wamawa Gawamawa. 11 sheet of days. 7 sheet, no. 7 half. 11.
So those consultations take different forms. Sometimes I'm the one who travels, and that's a lot of fun. I take Air Cree back, little propeller planes. Or in 2002, I did a whole tour with my family who accompanied me on a tour of the Cree communities to ask people, you know, what do you think the internet, what could we do? What could we do? So we had fun with our little canoe in our car, going to places we could drive to. And this is what this beautiful countryside looks like in the summer, just to make you dream a little bit. And sometimes, well, my means of transportation were different. So I move on to the next example I want to give you, which is the creation of web databases. So, so far I've illustrated, you know, plain HTML stuff and everything, but when it gets really interesting is, of course, trying to do databases. So why web databases? Well, they're tools for collaboration. A database is a tool for ongoing modification, unlike a book. Tool for working at a distance. Remember the 9 communities so far apart. And there is fairly low cost updating it. And of course, there is accessibility to all concerned and even more people. That's the beauty of the internet, even more people. So we were starting to touch, you know, urban Aboriginals and people who were not really sitting in Cree schools necessarily. The idea of an oral stories database came from a meeting in Wemingee with those 2 ladies, Frances Visitor and Linda Visitor. We were looking, I was asking, well, what can we do for an oral tradition, right? Well, they had a bunch of recordings. There was no archiving, no backup of those old tapes. And there was need for educational material for the upper grades in the schools. The focus had been so far on teaching literacy, not the oral tradition. There were several challenges we encountered in building an oral stories database: educational, ethical, and legal, and of course, technical. How we addressed the challenge? Well, we started, for example, to consult Cree program staff about elements of interface design. We did workshops for sound editing. We started working with database entry and maintenance. We also designed the database. For example, the thematic categories for the story, we paid close attention to categories that were relevant to them. We didn't take a categorization template that came from, Microsoft, whatever, database or something. So genre classification, the types of legends or stories they have, and so on. And of course, we had to provide ongoing technical support. I went around the communities offering sound editing workshops. This was in Wemingee in April 2003. And we included youth from the communities that were very interested in computers and were listening to the elders, and they were getting training in sound editing and preparing the material. So notice, this is a way to get people to do the work. I become a facilitator as a linguist. So we did a bunch of oral stories database workshop. What was unexpected was that the radio stations got involved. They were really interested because they wanted to learn digital sound editing, and they joined in, and they even asked to come here at CKCU in one summer and asked me to organize a workshop for them to work with the radio station here at Carleton. It was really interesting, things we hadn't planned for. Then over the summers, I also hired Cree students, and there was lots of capacity building in sound editing and a great interest from people in preserving and passing on the oral tradition. In 2008, the database had over 500 stories in it, and we transferred it and passed it on to the Cree editor from Chisasibi. I'm going to show you the database in a minute. Some ethical challenge came around. We had focus group for stories editor during workshops. We consulted a lawyer, and we sometimes edited the material. We didn't publish everything if it was sensitive. So this is what the database looked like. It's been updated a bit since then. So we were giving information on the sound quality, but the sound editor was recognized. So young people were really thrilled about that, that. Of course, like everything we've designed, there was an interface in Cree, so you could view the database in Cree. I'm going to play one of the sound files. So you see, the material was a bit, this was old material, right? Sometimes cracky and The Cree laugh a lot. So the database has two aspects. Always, all our database have like a user interface and then an editor interface, so that the people from the 9 different communities can edit online and modify their database as they like. We also created a biography database for the storytellers. And what was really interesting is this material, once this became available, all the anthropologists who had ever worked in those communities came and say, here, digitize my material, make it available for the people. It was really wonderful to see the response we got once they knew what it was going to be used for. And it's allowed people, the database is used in many ways today, even like to give the kids an assignment, and it allows people to compare different versions of stories, which they could never do before, because they only heard it from one person in the community or their grandfather. So that's for the next generation to work on, right? But it's a tremendous potential for the upper grades, which was the population we're aiming at. This is, again, the editing interface for the biography, maintainer's interface. We had some technical challenges. I'm not going to go too much into it, but usually availability and speed was always a problem. And when we started, people were still on dial-up. Although there was a priority to network the North, we had to decide, how much we had to cut our sound files, make them really short. How many bells and whistles do you give as opposed to the size of the files you load in the browser? How much you put in the browser, how much you make server heavy, these kind of problems. And as usual, like you heard in the video, how to keep up with browsers. They change them all the time. And of course, they don't worry about little fish like us. Database design has been a little bit like this good old joke, but in general, I think we ended up with what the user wanted. Other databases, one reason I could say as a sign of success is that we also made a book catalog like Amazon.Cree for all their publications. The Innu came. Innu is a neighboring language and asked us to do a book catalog as well, like the Cree, and also to do oral stories like the Cree, same database. The Swampy and Moose Cree stories were put online after that. And right now we're linking the stories to the thematic dictionaries that we're working on. So, which takes me now to my next example, the dictionary. So I was working as part of the editorial team on the Cree dictionary all along, and I was wondering, you know, how do I not become part of a machine that's not just homogenizing languages, and how do we document rapidly changing languages? What do we do? What should the dictionary look like, and so on? Well, with the Participatory Action Research Framework, what we did was to build an editorial team consisting of Cree language editors, selected by the staff members at Cree program, linguists, and an IT support person. Here are some of our Cree editors: Ruth Salt, Daisy Moore, who's now retired, Lucy, Bobby Salt, Northern Dialect. In 2012, well, what does the dictionary look like? Since 2004, we have the Cree English Cree on the web. 2007, we finished the French. We do annual revisions and updates, including documentation, because it's never finished. I mean, the Oxford English Dictionary is 500 years old. This one is, 10 years old, so we got 20 years old. We got to give it a bit of time. And, but it's also about creating new words. We have one database per dialect that we export in different formats. So we're not bothering with updating different things. We have moved pretty much to having everything in one database. And when we want to make a book, we want to make a web version, we want to make a CD, we want to make a portable version for your computer, we just export from that database. Documentation still taking place. What we noticed working with Cree editors is they didn't really want to document looking at the transitive animate finals. They wanted to work by themes, so smoking fish, because it was culturally relevant to them. And this was where they could best dialogue with the elders. As I said, we also do terminology workshops. So this is a newspaper article actually on work we did inviting nurses and people from the Cree Health Board and linguists, and training the Cree specialists in like morpheme analysis and little bits and pieces of work, and then working with the nurses to create vocabulary that was needed for people working in clinics in the communities. This is a picture from our latest workshop here at Carleton University. You recognize the front of Patterson Hall. And this was a workshop on geography. And I'm just going to show you how much fun that is and what it looks like.
It's either a person running, all around. Yeah, another word is like smoke.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. The other word is to see. So often
Ashtegam should be together.
The sunny side.
And so ashtategam is
the sunny side.
The sun, where the sun is.
Like if you're on a river, the north side would be the Ashtegam. That.
Means either side. That's more important.
It narrows to a point. Where the curve tongue point.
I want to highlight everything. Okay? And now I want to. It's reindeer moss, is it?
not this year.
Because
People can have a mouse over, and when they go over that part, ping, the Cree name shows up.
and the tree, through that. See, this part here is the next day. This is today. But the next day, line of Jayot. That's all I can explain.
I know what you know with the picture and the 1,000 words.
Now we know.
Now, in the värsta
Well, in the case of Cree, it's 2,000 words.
For new words, we have a terminology forum, and we display the different words that are proposed for new words before they make their way into the dictionary. What does the web dictionary look like in 2012? Well, we have a Cree interface, several search options. We allow spelling mistakes, very important in language where standardization of the orthography isn't fully agreed on nor practiced by speakers. We allow searching inflected forms. I'll explain that a little bit later. And we also allow links to our grammar and verb conjugations. I'm going to show you now a little bit this dictionary. I'm going to look up a word in Cree. Well, I'll show you in Cree syllabics. Or, yeah. And I'm going to make a spelling mistake. So there should be a dot on the na, on the first character here. Now, of course, that's the big moment, is the technology, right? So they found no word the way I typed it, but our relaxed search kicked in. And in order to build that relaxed search, what I did was like an inventory of the type of mistakes that speakers make. And then I worked with Terry Stewart, who is a graduate PhD from the cognitive science program, and we adapted algorithm that had been made, you know, like in Google when you make a mistake and you get your word. Did you mean this? Well, this is what Cree is telling you. Did you mean this? Actually, let's just fetch more word for you and see. And so there we go. We found nabeu. Okay. Another thing that the dictionary does, I'm going to search it in English now. Somehow my screen resolution. So we have some sound files.
Nikamo.
Okay, in the dictionary. But we also have a link to the verb paradigms. Now, how is this successful? In 2006, this is the first full year we have data for the use of the dictionary. We had about 10,000 words being searched in the first years. That's not bad for a language that has, 12,000 speakers, maybe only 5,000 or 6,000 of which are using the internet. Cree searches account for 28% of the searchers, and we have 73% in English. Now, what's interesting is that we have a steady climb over the years, and the statistics we got for last year is that we have nearly 50,000 searches. For 12,000 speakers, I think that's pretty good. Knowing that also those speakers have local versions on their machines, like the translators and people like that don't necessarily go on the internet because they have it at the tip of their hands. And what I find really interesting is that the Cree searchers are more frequent. People are actually looking for words in Cree. So what we can see here is, one reason we built a relaxed search, we didn't want people to get frustrated not finding the words in Cree and search for them in English. So what is happening here is that people are actually looking for the words in Cree and obviously finding them because they do it again. And we have, now that's the big wide internet. So of course there are people coming who are not coming from Cree communities who will never search in Cree. But we have, the English is down 57% from 73%. And we have the French now, accounting for 9%, we're in Quebec. But 34% of the Cree searches, 34% of the words being searched. Now, these are not hits. These are words that are actually searched, like I did the Napeu, and looked up, like you look up the results. That's what this means. Top 10 of our words, you want to know what they are? Love, thank you, bonjour, merci, and hello. The Innu liked it so much, they've asked us to do an Innu dictionary online using the same tools. So we build a relaxed search for the Innu, we put sound, pictures, and we're building the verb paradigm, the verb conjugation that go with it. This is a Pen Innu dictionary. It's not officially finished yet, but it's part of a Cura research project that that will make a pan-Innu dictionary covering Quebec and Labrador. So it's Innu, French, and English. In order to create all those verbs, here is a
VAI, conjugaison 09, radical A-I-E ou N, Pabdo. Pabdalizen. Pabdo, indéfini X, Pabdananis.
Même chose. Papato. 2. Chipapatanache. Chipapatanache.
VAI, conjugaison 03, radical A-I-E ou N, Akshu. 1. Dakshadi. Dakshadi.
Mais je crois qu'aujourd'hui, prenez une pause quand vous avez besoin, puis continuez. Je crois que c'est le meilleur investissement de votre temps.
Je vais finir ça, après ça on va faire une petite pause.
Ok, maman, on finit ça, cette partie-là,
Ok.
puis après on...
This is at CKCU, and what's interesting is while I used to be the one with the headphones and prompting them and everything, over the years they have become totally autonomous, and they do the recordings, and sometimes they do the recordings at home in their studio. And so there has been an increasing independence in the ability to create material. Next, I'm going to talk about language lessons and games. This was part of an interesting demand. The Cree had made Cree language of instructions in the school, and the kids were learning to read and write in Cree, and they were leaving little notes on the fridge for their parents in Cree, and the parents couldn't read Cree. They could speak it, but they couldn't read it. So the Cree School Board and the Cree programs, little department I was working in, was really inundated by demands for Cree literacy courses. So we figured, well, what if we give people the ability to self-teach them, on the internet and make some kind of online games. So in 2006, we designed games mainly aimed at adults, but what often happens with designing any material for Aboriginal languages that you end up with multiple users. Everybody, soon enough, everybody was using them, not just the people they were aimed at. The kids were using it and trying to, beat their parents and so on. And in 2007 to 10, we then made more games because they said, we're bored. We've played all the games. We have the highest score. Give us more. So we made more games. And in 2009, the Innu came and they said, we also want games. So they got the money from Heritage Canada, and there we went. We made games for them. We're still making. So what did we do? Well, these were people who could read English but speak Cree fluently. So the oral instructions in the games were in Cree or Innu, and the written instructions are in English or in French. We have different levels. We have different dialects for the sound. Whenever an exercise has a sound, you've got to account for many dialects. And basically, the games are nothing fancy. They're like sound, image, text matching games. But they're extremely popular. It's not World of Warcraft, but they're simple language games, and they're very popular. Of course, because they're computerized, you can have a random order, they can be timed, you can have points, you can keep track of progress and of the best player, and you can beat the best player, you can keep track of your own progress, and the best player is public, and so you can try to beat the best player. And that happens to be very popular. So this is what the syllabic lessons looked in 2006 when we first started. And this is, on the other end, more advanced, an Innu language game. You see, that's like a simple close test. Nothing fancy again, except that, the thrill is about beating your friend or holding the higher score. I'm running out of time, so I will let you go and play the games if you wish so after the talk. But I'm going to show you what it looks like on the designer end. So again, we have the user end and then the designer end. And the designer end, of course, there is the programmer. But we make an interface for people to create their own exercise and to generate exercises as they wish. So this is during a workshop here at Carleton.
Moi, j'ai le go avant.
Ah, mais on va pouvoir changer l'ordre. Regardez si vous avez le
a
numéro,
tous.
il change ton numéro, tu soumets les changements.
Quelque chose comme ça. Ah, mais...
Ah.
Parce qu'elle est là 4, 4 comme le mien. Sauf qu'elle, c'est l'ouest et moi, c'est l'est.
They're working on parallel dialects, so they're trying to make it parallel dialect. What we've learned over the years is that it's important to take care of the user's end. This is my wonderful technical director, Delassie Torcorno, who's been with me for 5 years. And recently what we did at the suggestion of the Innu is to send him to Sept-Îles for a week to visit the schools and to see what the computers look like for the people who are actually using them. And again, often the solutions are not that complicated. You know, you don't need a jet plane to go to the corner store. You just need a bicycle or a good pair of shoes. And there is a need for capacity building, for talking with the technicians and seeing what the school look like. So here is one of the places that Dell visited, and another school he visited. And they treated him really well. It looks like he got chocolate. And what's important is to see, you know, people in their working environment and how the games play on their end. And they can describe to us, they can do a print screen, but it was useful to actually go there and test the speed and everything. So if you're still with me, I'm now going to move on to the next project that is an example of something that sometimes, if anybody had told me I would be doing that today, I would not have believed it. It's a linguistic atlas of the Cree, Innu, and now Ojibwe languages that are spoken in Canada and in the US. It started all in 2002. I had hired Cree students from Heritage College to work on the dreaded documentation of Cree verb conjugations. What we were doing here is we had the data, we had collected the data over the years, and the students had to enter the data. It was all on word processor, and they had to cut and paste and put that in a database so that we could create those tools that going to let you search inflected forms and this kind. This was in 2002. I thought, poor students, they never see the end of that work in their young student lifetime, right? They were here for the summer. So I thought, I got to do a little project, a little aside project with them that's going to motivate them and make them feel they've accomplished something. And so what we did was we created a little conversation CD. You know, something you buy when you want to go to Cuba or you want to learn basic Spanish. So we did basic Cree, you know, 2 dialects. We recorded 21 topics of conversations. This is what it looked like, little manual, a little CD, the dialect written in syllabics and in Roman, and then you could have a CD. And oh well, little did I know, soon enough, this became super popular. We printed 1,000 copies of the CD, and 2 years later, we had to print another 1,000 copies. The Cree were using it to learn French. It was like, again, you know, like used for multi-level users, not just for white people moving to the Cree community and wanting to converse, but for everybody. And so I got invited by the Cree Language Retention Committee in Saskachewan in 2003 to talk about the Cree.org website. And I showed them a map of Cree dialects, did a little workshop on sound editing, and recorded the words of their dialect for the family. And on the way back, well, I was being driven back to the airport, and I had a ha-ha moment with 2 Native women there, and they said, Marie, can you send us the map you showed us? We didn't know we were connected to the Cree in Quebec. It was really interesting. You gave us the key. We know now why when they say that, we say that, and it's obvious we're connected. You know, like, you know, French, Spanish are close or something like that. And then I thought, oh, that's sound, map, an atlas. And so, like, sometimes people ask, I felt a bit ashamed of this atlas for a while, because from a purely linguistic perspective, this is not how you make linguistic atlas, right? You go and look for linguistic features and you select your speakers. And this was based on a conversation CD that people wanted to adapt. They said, can you send us your sound files and your text? And can we make one for our community, a conversation? So there was a Naskapi conversation, an Innu conversation, a Plains Cree conversation, and so on. And I said, guys, sure, you can have my sound files, you can have everything and adapt, but in exchange, you give me back the sound files, I'll put it on a map. And this is how the Linguistic Atlas was born. So using the same framework, we now have 17 languages, 25 different speakers, over 10,000 sound files. And after Easter, next week, if everything goes well, we'll be adding about 7 other languages. At the end of the current project, we should have 28 other languages. What does it do? Well, you have a map, and you click on it's a Google map, right? And Google Maps nicely came along just in 2005 when we started, right? Because the prototype, we didn't have Google Maps. And what you do is that you click on the map, on the location, and then you get a little sound file that plays. It's fun. And you can read the text in syllabics or in Roman, and you see who the speaker is, and the speakers are very proud to be on the Atlas. And you can download the sound files, so you can play it on your iPod, and you decide you want to learn, say, greetings and family terms. Well, you pick those categories, and then you pick the languages you want to have, and then you download an MP3 file. Some technical consideration. As the other work, we are choosing always open source as much as we can. We're using Google Maps, standard internet server, software, MySQL and Python, and we're using a model view controller paradigm, which is a paradigm for those of you who are into computer science that is driven our recent database very much. Even now, the way we're doing the dictionary in 2012, we're trying to use this kind of programming paradigm for a relational database. The organization of the database, it's a truly relational database. The circles here indicate a one-to-many relationship. For example, a single speaker is associated with multiple sounds, but every sound is associated only with a single speaker, and so on. The maintainers interface, again, the people who are participating in this project across Canada have access to the online maintainers interface. This is an example of one for phrase and sounds. You can view the database. It's a relational database. You can choose to view it in many ways, and we're creating new views as we need to do the work. The Atlas also has some interesting pedagogical applications. It's used for language learning, literacy, standardization of orthographies, strangely enough for us. People really like the fact they can promote. People like Yvette and Hélène from Institut Chakapesh you saw in the studio, they really like, they can promote a standard orthography, and they say, well, look, we write it the same, but it sounds differently. And you can click in all over the Innu communities, we write it one way, but see, we're not betraying you. You can still say it the way you like to say it, but we have one standard orthography. So they're using, the Atlas is actually very popular in literacy courses, which is not, again, it's not something I thought would happen. It wasn't designed for that. People are very fond of discovering dialectal variation. The fact that when they, hear Chimun here, it's Kimun there, and to become aware of that, as you speakers of English probably enjoy finding out about how people say it in Australia or other places, right? And of course, the Atlas provides some kind of linguistic training. We have classroom activities for introductory linguistics classes and literacy courses where people can download activity sheets that guide them through playing with the Atlas to discover how some principles of diachronic and synchronic variation across dialects. Again, it's pretty simple, but it works. The project of the Linguistic Atlas is actually involving a lot of people right now as I'm speaking. And many of the people involved are also designing dictionaries for Algonquian languages. And so we just had a workshop in February, and we were really brainstorming about how we can make those dictionaries work across dialects and for maybe languages that are less fortunate in terms of having entities and institutions that can support the language work. My conclusion, well, is that I had started with 3 questions, right? How can information technology help linguistic diversity? How can linguists have a positive impact on a community? And how is academic research redefined in such a context? Well, academic research, I think, is changed in the sense that it's getting out of the ivory tower. It's a general trend for the knowledge economy driven by the internet. I want to quote here an email I received from a young Aboriginal man who is serving time in prison. And he said, "Thank you for your website. I'm so glad I can spend some of my time in prison relearning the language of my ancestors." It's creating, I think when you create an environment that stimulates curiosity, it can cause learning through self-instruction and peer-shared knowledge. And I'm citing here Shugata Mitra with the hole in the wall experiment. It's been my experience that these kind of things work, and you cannot predict how they're going to work, but there are things that are going to happen, right? I think it's changing also academic research or linguistic research in really bringing together again language and culture and looking for culturally appropriate ways to do research. And my conclusion in the method is almost like you need to apply a permaculture principle. So you begin with long and careful observation, which is what you do in science anyway, but rather than careless intervention, right? And then you look for ways to make the least possible change for the greatest effect. And small changes first, and then you observe their effects. And I'm not sure I can observe all their effects, but what I also think is really important is cultivating a relationship with people while following your inspiration. Écoutez, which means that's it in Cree.